Hi, my name is Tammy Bradford. I am the manager of the Creston Museum, and this is a Creston History Short. Today we're going to talk about the reclamation of the Creston Flats. This is a big story here. Up until the 1930s, the flats west of town flooded almost every year. The Kootenay River in the spring would overflow its banks and completely cover the entire area. We had one big lake all the way from the north end of Kootenay Lake down into the United States, at least as far as Bonners Ferry. And you can imagine what that would do for agriculture in the valley. In fact, we have photos of Reclamation farmhouse, which was built on the flats in the 1890s, and in some years the water would come up as high as the ground floor windows of that house. So it made things very challenging for farmers who were trying to grow their grain crops out there. But there were efforts right from the very beginning of white settlement in the valley to solve that problem. And it started with a guy named William Adolph Bailey Groman, who attempted to prevent flooding on the flats at Creston by diverting the Kootenay River into Columbia Lake at Invermere at Canal Flats. The reason the town is called Canal Flats is because Bailey Groman built a canal there in an attempt to do this. Now, it didn't work. There were a whole bunch of reasons for that, but Bailey Groman sold all of his interests in the Creston area to the Alberta BC Exploration Company. And these are the guys who first tried to dike the river to prevent the flooding. They tried it in the spring of 1892 and on into 1893, and actually did start building some dikes along Boundary Creek at the south end of the valley. But the winter of 1893-1894 was a very, very heavy snowfall winter. I've read accounts that in Nelson, for example, they were digging through drifts 15 feet deep. People were still talking about that snowfall years and years later. It showed up in the newspapers of accounts of the worst snowfall that anybody could remember. And to make matters worse, the spring of 1894 was long and cold. There was a massive rainstorm in the middle of June, and the weather finally broke all at the same time. So all of that snowpack that was in the mountains came rushing down and washed away a good many things, actually. A sawmill at Proctor wound up floating down to Nelson. Most of Caslow, between the rising Kootenay Lake and the overflowing Caslow Creek, was underwater. And here, the Alberta BC Explorations Company dikes were completely washed away. They tried again in the 1890s, again in the 1910s and early 1920s, brought in farmers from the United States in late 1920s and tried again to build the dikes. But they couldn't build the dikes high enough and fast enough to withstand the floodwaters the following year. They might get a year or two of good crops. The second or third, fourth year at most, those crops would be washed away. Mr. Constable, Guy Constable, was one of the people involved in that, and his son told me once that his father lost his shirt, very nearly went bankrupt in these failed attempts to reclaim the flats for agriculture. In 1934-35, they tried something different. First of all, they divided the area into diking districts. They had 4 different diking districts, all building dikes at the same time, so that the entire flats would be protected, not just part of it. They made use of natural rises in the land. Just south of town is what's called the Dutchman's Dike. It's a natural rise in the land that they hoped would be high enough to withstand floodwaters. So they diked south of it the first year, and then the second year diked north of it and used that natural dike to prevent the floods in the intervening time. And they also made it an obligation of the farmers to build the dikes. Instead of the farmers focusing on their farms, they focused on the dikes, so they were actually able to build the dikes. And then the next most important thing that they did was divert the Goat River into the Kootenay, just south of town. Instead of the Goat River meandering north along the flats, more or less parallel to the Kootenay, they only had one river to deal with, and that essentially cut their diking length in half. And it worked. 1934, 1935, they finally got the dikes built fast enough. They withstood the floodwaters that year and the following year. 1938 was an unusual year. It did flood, and again in 1948. But other than that, the dikes have been flood-free ever since. I'm Tammy Bradford, and this has been a Creston History Short.